Alcohol isn't what you think it is. Welcome to NDE's Chronicles. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to help my story reach those who need to hear it. My name is Eve Bailey, and I never imagined that I would go through a near-death experience that would bring me face-to-face with Jesus in an instant. In a moment of complete stillness, I was transported to a kingdom of light and unconditional love. In his presence, a question arose with great force. Is drinking wine or beer a sin? Can a Christian drink in moderation? The answer wasn't just about alcohol, it was about balance, awareness, and love. This experience forever changed my view on faith, choices, and grace. That day began like any other. I woke up feeling normal, went through my routine breakfast, some chores, and spent some time reading the Bible. But throughout the day, I felt a strange weight on my chest. It wasn't physical pain, but an emotional burden I couldn't explain. By the afternoon, the sensation grew stronger. I sat down, closed my eyes, and suddenly everything changed. I was no longer in my living room. I found myself in a place of intense, serene light, as if I had entered a dream, but I knew it wasn't a dream. It was something far greater. The light was warm and enveloping, like a pure embrace of love. There was no fear, no confusion, just a peace so deep that I didn't want to leave. Then, a presence emerged from the light. I knew exactly who it was. I didn't need an introduction. It was Jesus. It wasn't his appearance that made me recognize him. It was the way he made me feel. His gaze carried love, understanding, and a serene, unshakable authority. He knew everything about me, every thought, every mistake, every fear I carried, but there was no judgment in his eyes, only compassion. When he spoke, his voice wasn't just a sound. It was an experience. His words poured directly into my heart. "Why are you here so soon?" It wasn't an accusation, but an invitation for reflection. In that moment, I realized I had crossed to the other side. I didn't know how to respond, but before I could process it all, he reached out to me. When he touched my skin, I felt an intense warmth that dissolved all my worries. In that instant, I understood that I was in a place of pure gracia, place where love was the only language. And without a doubt, I knew my life would never be the same. The transition was as natural as breathing. One moment, I was sitting in my chair, and the next, I wasn't in my body anymore. There was no pain, no fear, nothing abrupt, just a gentle movement, as if I had stepped from one room into another. The first impact was the silence, but not a frightening silence. It was the kind of silence that calms the soul. The air, if I can call it that, was dense with peace. I felt light, with no concerns of the physical world. For a moment, I wondered if I had fallen asleep, but everything felt so real, so vivid, that I realized it wasn't a dream. It was something much greater. I realized the space around me wasn't empty. It was filled with a light so radiant that it seemed to have life of its own. But it wasn't an overwhelming, harsh light. It was gentle and inviting, like the glow of 1,000 candles burning at once. I felt drawn to it as if it were calling me home. Then, something incredible happened. The light began to take form. At first, it was just a silhouette, but as it grew closer, I realized it was a figure. It was Jesus. I can't explain how I knew, but I felt it in every part of my being. He didn't need to announce himself. His presence alone was enough. The moment I saw him, my heart filled with indescribable joy. It was as if all the pain, regret, and fear I had carried simply dissolved in his presence. He didn't speak immediately, but his gaze said everything. It was a look full of love, compassion, and a depth of understanding I had never experienced before. That's when I realized I had crossed into a realm beyond anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just a place, it was an experience of being completely known and loved. The concept of time and space seemed to disappear, and I felt free. When Jesus finally spoke, his words were like music. "You are here for a reason, but this is not your time yet." His voice carried a purpose that resonated deeply within me. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I knew that I was about to learn something that would change my life forever. In his presence, in the grandeur of that light, I felt what it truly meant to be loved unconditionally. His gaze kept me in place not by force, but by the overwhelming power of acceptance. My whole being was bathed in warmth, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel shame or guilt, only love. And not just any love, it was perfect, divine, infinite. Memories of my life began to unfold around me like a movie. But I wasn't just a spectator. I was reliving every moment, every choice I made, every word I spoke, every thought I had. Everything was exposed, but there was no judgment, only understanding. Jesus didn't condemn me for the mistakes I made. Instead, he showed me how each moment had shaped who I am. What struck me most was seeing the ripple effect of my actions. Small acts of kindness I had forgotten had created waves of positive impact in the lives of others. At the same time, moments of anger or selfishness had left wounds I hadn't even noticed. Through it all, Jesus remained by my side, his presence a constant reminder that I was loved, regardless of everything. I wanted to stay in that light forever. I felt at home, as if I had finally found the place I had always searched for without even knowing it. But deep down, I knew I couldn't stay. Jesus didn't bring me there just to feel his love. He wanted to teach me something. He placed his hand on my shoulder, and in that touch I felt an indescribable peace. Love is the greatest commandment, he said. Everything flows from it. His words weren't just advice, they were a truth that resonated in every part of me. And then I understood his love wasn't just for me. It was for everyone, and I had the responsibility to share it. Listening to Jesus speak was a unique experience. His voice wasn't just sound. It was a feeling, a vibration that seemed to resonate in every part of my being. It was gentle, yet powerful, comforting, yet filled with authority. Every word he spoke carried such absolute truth that there was no room for doubt. He didn't start with criticism or correction. Instead, he asked a simple question. Why? Why did you come here so soon? His tone wasn't accusatory, but curious, as if he wanted me to reflect on the answer myself. I didn't know what to say. I felt like a child standing before a loving father, speechless but certain that I was safe. Jesus continued his life on earth, still incomplete, still more for you to do, more to learn. His words weren't a reprimand, but an invitation to grow. In that moment, I realized this experience wasn't just a simple moment, it was a call to something greater. It was a turning point in my journey. It was as though Jesus was waiting for me to ask the question, and it slipped from my lips. Lord, is drinking wine or beer a sin? Can a Christian drink moderately? I had never really thought about it before, but in that instant, it felt like the most important question in the world. I needed to know what he thought not just about drinking, but about how we should live our lives. Jesus smiled. And in that smile, I saw an unwavering love. What matters is not the act, but the heart behind it, he said. Drinking wine is not in itself a sin. I myself drank wine during my time on earth. He explained that the issue wasn't the wine but the intention and relationship with it. Moderation is key in all things. Your body is a temple, he continued, and it must be treated with care. But don't let rules and regulations obscure love and grace. What I look at is the heart, not the outward action. His words were simple, but they carried a depth I couldn't fully grasp at that moment. It wasn't just about drinking. It was about how we approach all aspects of life with love, awareness, and respect for the gifts God has given us. I stood before him, feeling that the question had come directly from my heart, unscripted. It seemed strange to bring such a worldly topic into the presence of the divine, but at that moment I realized that this question represented something much bigger. Jesus didn't react with surprise or judgment. Instead, he smiled a warm smile full of understanding. His gaze communicated that no question was too small or insignificant if it came from a sincere heart. He seemed to gently invite me to share why this mattered to me. I tried to explain, stumbling over my words, as I always did when I felt torn between different teachings. Some pastors condemned drinking entirely, while others said moderate consumption was acceptable. I wanted clarity, not human opinions, but from the one who truly knew. His response was immediate, filled with wisdom. Drinking wine or beer is not in itself a sin, he began, his calm voice full of profound meaning. What matters is the intention behind the act and the impact it has on you and others. What flows from the heart is what I see, not just the action itself. Jesus continued, explaining that in his time, wine symbolized celebration, joy, and communion. I turned water into wine at a wedding not to encourage excess, but to honor a moment of joy and union. But he also reminded me that just as wine could bring joy, it could also cause harm if consumed without awareness. Moderation, he said, doesn't mean simply limiting consumption. It means being aware of how your actions affect your body, your spirit, and those around you. When you consume something with gratitude and awareness, it aligns with love. But when it becomes a means of escape or destruction, it takes you away from grace. Then he showed me glimpses of people's lives, impacted differently by this issue. Some celebrated responsibly, while others had been consumed by addiction and suffering. Don't judge others for their choices, he added. Instead, be an example. Show love, compassion, and understanding. That moment transformed my perspective. It was no longer about labeling an action as right or wrong. It was about understanding the intention behind it. Jesus didn't just answer my question, he taught me a new way of thinking, based on grace, balance, and love. He continued to explain the scriptures about wine and moderation. The scriptures were written to guide, not to imprison, he said, his voice gentle but firm. My teachings are rooted in love, not in rigid rules. He reminded me of the moment when he shared wine with his disciples at the Last Supper. This cup is the new covenant in my blood. He had used wine as a symbol of grace and sacrifice, just as many of God's gifts can have a sacred purpose. Wine can unite people, celebrate joy, and remind them of my love, but it should never be used to harm or control. As Jesus spoke, I realized how often we misinterpret Scripture, focusing on the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the message. Paul wrote to the Ephesians, "Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery." This wasn't a condemnation of wine itself, but a warning against excess and the loss of self-control. Jesus explained that the Bible teaches moderation, awareness, and responsibility, not simple prohibition. His words brought a balance I had never considered before. He pointed out that even in the Old Testament, wine was seen as a blessinga gift from God to cheer the human heart. But every gift comes with responsibility, he added. The freedom I offer is not for reckless indulgence, but for wise choices guided by love. Then he addressed the culture of judgment within the Christian community. Many of my followers divide themselves over interpretations of Scripture, he said, forgetting the greatest commandment, "Oh, love one another." Don't use my words to condemn your brothers and sisters for their choices. Use them to guide, support, and bring peace. I was struck by how easily he transformed my understanding of faith. It wasn't about rigidly following rules. It was about living in alignment with the principles of love, grace, and responsibility. Whatever you eat, drink, or do, do it to honor God, he said. This is the true meaning of following me. At the end of his explanation, I felt a weight lift from my soul. The Bible was no longer a set of rules to follow blindly, but a living guide to help me walk with grace and wisdom. One of the most powerful lessons Jesus taught me was about moderation, not just in drinking, but in all aspects of life. Moderation is not restriction, he said. It is freedom, the freedom to enjoy without being enslaved. He explained that moderation is deeply tied to self-awareness and self-discipline. When you drink wine or beer, he said, ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is it to celebrate, to connect, to honor a moment, or is it to escape, numb, or fill a void? His words were gentle, yet penetrating, forcing me to reflect on my own intentions. Jesus showed me that moderation is not about deprivation, but about balance. Excess of anything, even good things, can take you away from the path of peace, he said. Moderation allows you to enjoy life's blessings while remaining aware of their impact. He shared the image of a perfectly balanced scale and explained that our lives are like that scale. When you tip too far to one side, you lose your stability. Moderation keeps you centered, with your feet on the ground and free. What struck me most was how he emphasized love as the foundation of moderation. When you act out of love for yourself, for others, and for God, you naturally practice moderation. It's not about limiting yourself, it's about living in harmony. He also warned against judging others for their choices. Each person has their own balance, their own equilibrium to maintain. Don't measure someone else's journey by your own standards. Instead, encourage them with kindness and understanding. By the end of this lesson, I understood that moderation is not a burden, but a gift, a way of living with freedom, joy, and responsibility, in tune with God's love. Then Jesus showed me the ripple effects of our choices. Even a simple act like drinking every action, no matter how small, creates waves, he said. These waves can bring life or destruction. Instantly, I was taken to scenes on Earth, witnessing real lives unfolding before my eyes. I saw people gathered with friends, sharing a glass of wine in celebration. Their laughter and connections created waves of joy that spread to everyone around them. But then, I saw the other side. I saw someone drinking alone, using alcohol to numb their pain. And that pain didn't stop with them, it spread to their loved ones, creating waves of suffering and separation. Jesus explained that our choices don't exist in isolation. They affect those around us, often in ways we can't see. That's why awareness and love must guide every decision. He also showed me how some people use their freedom to drink responsibly, setting a good example, while others fall into patterns of excess that harm not just themselves but also their families, communities, and even strangers. When you live with intention, he said, you create waves of love, healing, and connection. But when you act without thought, you risk causing harm. What impacted me most was how Jesus framed this lesson in terms of responsibility, not guilt. You are not called to be perfect, he said, but to be aware. And with awareness comes the power to choose wisely, to create waves of grace instead of chaos. His words made me realize that every decision, big or small, has the potential to impact others. It was a revelation, humbling and empowering, that changed the way I view not just drinking but every aspect of my life. Jesus' lesson touched something deep within me, the delicate balance between responsibility and the freedom we receive as God's children. He explained that freedom is one of humanity's greatest gifts, but it comes with the responsibility to use it wisely. You are free to make choices, he said, but every choice has consequences, not just for you, but for others. As he spoke, I felt the weight of this truth settle in my heart. Jesus explained that responsibility isn't about punishment or shame. It's about recognizing the impact of our decisions and taking ownership of them. True freedom, he said, is not about doing whatever you want, but choosing what is good, what is loving, and what is in line with my teachings. He showed me moments from my own life when I exercised my freedom without fully understanding its consequences. There were times I made choices without considering how they might affect others, some small, like letting frustration show when speaking to a loved one, and others more significant, like turning to harmful habits in times of stress. In each of these moments, he didn't condemn me but gently guided me to see how those choices created waves around me. At the same time, he showed me the beauty of using freedom responsibly. I saw moments when I chose kindness, forgiveness, or self-control, and how those decisions brought healing and joy to others. You don't need to be perfect, he reminded me, but you are called to seek love in all things. Jesus also emphasized that responsibility shouldn't be confused with judgment. Don't impose your own standards on others, he said. Instead, encourage them to seek me and live according to their unique journey. It was a humble reminder that each person walks their own path, and it's not for me to decide how they should live. By the end of this lesson, I understood that freedom and responsibility are not opposites, but complementary. One without the other leads to chaos or fear, but together they create a life grounded in love, wisdom, and grace. One of the most impactful moments of my experience came when Jesus allowed me to witness the lives of other souls in the afterlife. It was as if I had glimpsed a vast tapestry where each thread represented a person's journey. Each life was unique, but all were interconnected in ways I could never have imagined. I saw people whose lives on earth were marked by faith and love. Their light shone brightly, and the joy they radiated was contagious. They were souls who lived with intention, choosing goodness, forgiveness, and gratitude even in the face of challenges. Their lives were not perfect, but their hearts were aligned with God's love, and that made all the difference. Then I saw other souls, burdened by regret and lost opportunities. They weren't being punished, but were in a state of deep reflection, aware of the impact of their choices on earth. Jesus stood by them, offering comfort and guidance, reminding them that it was never too late to seek healing and transformation. What surprised me most was the absence of condemnation. The afterlife wasn't about judgment in the way I had been taught to fear, but about growth, understanding, and reconciliation. Each soul was on its own journey, and Jesus was there for each one, offering love and support. I also realized how interconnected we all are. One person's choices can influence many others, often in ways we don't even perceive. Jesus showed me a woman who chose to forgive someone who had hurt her deeply. Her act of forgiveness set off a chain reaction of healing that touched the lives of people she had never met. It was a powerful reminder that our actions, no matter how small they seem, can create waves that extend far beyond ourselves. This vision left me in awe of the complex beauty of God's plan. It's not about being perfect or avoiding mistakes. It's about striving to live in alignment with love and grace. Even when we stray, Jesus is always there to guide us back to the path of light. In the presence of Jesus, I understood something that forever transformed my faith. Judgment and grace are not opposites, but work together in perfect harmony. Jesus explained that his judgment isn't about punishment, but about truth. I see you as you truly are. He said every flaw, every strength, every intention, and yet I love you completely. This revelation was both humbling and liberating. I realized I didn't need to hide my imperfections from him. He already knew everything about me, the good, the bad, and everything in between. Yet, his love for me remained unwavering. This was grace in its purest form, to be fully known and completely loved. I had been quick to judge others, but Jesus didn't rebuke me for it. Instead, he gently invited me to reflect. When you judge others, you distance yourself from my grace, he said. Judgment without love leads to division, but judgment with love leads to growth. I also saw moments where I had been harsh with myself, carrying guilt and shame long after seeking forgiveness. Jesus reminded me that his grace is enough. Let my grace set you free, he said. Use it to move forward, not to remain stuck in the past. By the end of this lesson, I understood that judgment wasn't something to fear, but something to embrace with humility and love. It wasn't a weapon for condemnation, but a tool for growth. Through it all, God's grace was the thread that wove every piece together. One of the most profound moments of my encounter with Jesus came when he spoke about the gift of second chances. Your time on earth is not over, he said. There's more for you to do, more to learn, and more to share. His words struck me like a wave. I realized how often I had taken life for granted, assuming there would always be more time to say what needed to be said, to make amends, or to chase the dreams God placed in my heart. Before Jesus, I saw how precious and fleeting life is. He explained that every moment we have is an opportunity to choose love, seek forgiveness, and align with his purpose. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment, he said. Every moment is perfect when lived with intention and grace. Then he showed me scenes from my life where I had been given second chances. Some were small, like the chance to apologize to a friend after an argument. Others were transformative, like the decision to leave behind habits that no longer served me. In each case, I saw how God's grace had been present, gently guiding me toward growth and healing. But Jesus also reminded me that second chances come with responsibility. When you are given a new opportunity, use it wisely, he said. Do not take my grace for granted. Let it inspire you to live a life that honors my love. By the end of this lesson, I felt a new sense of purpose. I knew that as I returned to Earth, I would carry with me this gift of second chances, living a life of gratitude, love, and service, and for that, I would be eternally grateful. When Jesus told me it wasn't my time yet, I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, I wanted to stay in his presence forever, wrapped in the love and peace only he could provide. On the other, I understood that my journey on Earth was still unfinished. You have a mission, he said. What you've learned here, you must share. Suddenly, I felt a shift, as though the very fabric of the heavenly realm was pulling me back. It wasn't abrupt or frightening, but undeniable. I felt my spirit gently guided back into my body as the brilliant light of heaven began to fade. I heard Jesus' voice one last time. Remember this, Eve. Every moment is an opportunity to choose love, grace, and purpose. Share what you've seen. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the hospital. The sound of monitors and the sterile smell of the room were shocking after the serenity of heaven. My body felt heavy, as if anchored by gravity after experiencing the lightness of the spiritual realm. Tears rolled down my face, not out of sadness, but because of the magnitude of what I had just experienced. The doctors and nurses were relieved to see me awake. They said I had suffered a cardiac arrest and been unconscious for several minutes. Little did they know, in those few minutes, I had lived an eternity in the presence of Jesus. I couldn't explain everything right away. I needed time to process. In the days that followed, I began to notice subtle changes within myself. The world seemed brighter, and I felt an unshakable peace even in the face of challenges. Every interaction, every decision carried new meaning because I now understood the ripple effect of my actions. I had seen how even the smallest choices could create waves of love or pain, and I was determined to live with intention. Returning to the physical world wasn't easy, but the wisdom I had gained gave me a renewed sense of purpose. I felt the responsibility to share my experience and the lessons Jesus had taught me. I knew this wasn't just for meat, was for everyone seeking clarity, peace, and a deeper connection with God. After processing the magnitude of my near-death experience, I knew I couldn't keep it to myself. The teachings and wisdom Jesus had shared were too profound, too transformative to remain private. It wasn't just my story. It was a message of hope, grace, and love meant for anyone willing to listen. At first, I wasn't sure how to share my experience. Would people believe me? Would they think I was imagining things? But then I remembered Jesus' words. Every moment is an opportunity to choose love. Sharing my story was an act of love, a way to encourage others to reflect on their own lives and seek a closer relationship with God. I began by telling my family at a dinner table one night. I shared everything: the bright light, the overwhelming love, and the conversation that changed my life forever. I shared with them the conversation I had with Jesus about wine, moderation, and living with intention. They listened attentively, and by the end, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. My sister, who carried guilt from a past mistake, said my story helped her understand God's grace in a new way. It's not about perfection, she said, echoing Jesus' words. It's about love. From there, I felt a calling to share my experience more broadly. I began writing about it, posting small reflections online, and even speaking at local churches. Every time I shared, I felt the weight of the mission Jesus had entrusted me with. People came to me afterward, thanking me for reminding them that God's love is unconditional, and that every choice, no matter how small, matters. What surprised me the most was how many people connected with the question I asked Jesus: is drinking wine or beer a sin? For some, it was a genuine question, while for others it symbolized a deeper issue about how to live a life that honors God. I shared Jesus' response about moderation, awareness, and intention, and I saw how this perspective brought peace to many hearts. Sharing this experience hasn't always been easy. There were moments of doubt and fear, but whenever I felt hesitant, I remembered the love I felt in Jesus' presence. That love propelled me forward, reminding me that this was bigger than meat, was about touching lives and spreading a message of grace. One of the most transformative lessons from my near-death experience was the concept of spiritual freedom. Before that encounter, I often felt overwhelmed by the rules and expectations that seemed to define my faith. I tried to follow each teaching to the letter, fearing that any misstep could take me away from God. But in the presence of Jesus, I learned something radically different. True freedom comes from living in alignment with love, not from strict adherence to rules. Jesus' words about wine and moderation perfectly encapsulated this idea. Your body is a temple, he said, but it is the heart I observe. This simple statement shattered my preconceived notions about faith. It wasn't about whether I drank or abstained. It was about the intention behind my actions. Was I honoring God? Was I living in a way that reflected His love and grace? This understanding lifted a tremendous weight from my soul. For the first time, I realized that faith wasn't about perfection, but about authenticity. Spiritual freedom didn't mean doing whatever I wanted. It meant living in a way that honored God while staying true to myself. It was a freedom rooted in love, grace, and responsibility. When I returned to the world, this new perspective changed everything. I stopped worrying about whether I was good enough for God, and instead focused on living with love and intention. I began to see faith not as a set of rules to follow, but as a relationship to nurture. This shift brought me a peace and joy I had never experienced before. Spiritual freedom also gave me the courage to let go of judgment, both of myself and of others. I no longer felt the need to measure my worth based on anyone else's standards. Instead, I focused on walking my own path, guided by the love and wisdom Jesus had shared with me. Throughout this journey, I learned that spiritual freedom doesn't mean the absence of responsibility. On the contrary, it's about embracing responsibility as a gift. It means recognizing that every choice we make is an opportunity to reflect God's love and grace in the world. With this understanding, I found a sense of purpose and peace I never thought possible. Remember the words of 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. If my story touched your heart, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to Near-Death Experiences Chronicles for more inspiring stories.